The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Oh, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I wish you a happy new year and trust that you and all colleagues have had a very good break, refreshed, batteries recharged and ready to go. For myself, I spent a lot of time in the beautiful central Otago, deepening the mountain bike tracks, trying to keep the rabbit population down and otherwise relaxing, and doing a little bit of reflecting and reading on new responsibilities as now having taken off the Minister of Revenue portfolio of the Honourable Todd McClay and passing back police to my successor, the Honourable Judith Collins, and I'm sure she will do a great job of that. I was listening very carefully to the replies to the Prime Minister's speech, including Andrew Little, the Leader of the Opposition, who in his first just about breathless intonation mentioned me, which was rather interesting. Of all of the very important burning issues of 2016, apparently he's still exercised by worm farms and lavender growing. Never mind that the regulation that referred to has been changed and isn't even brought into law yet. But I do think that despite the levity around all of that last year, one of the things that conversation did in the passage of the Health and Safety Reform Bill was that it shone a light on workplace health and safety in a way that hasn't been done in this country for many, many years. And so I was very, very pleased, albeit that I didn't make any public statements about it at the time. I was very pleased in December to note the Statistics New Zealand release of the 3-year moving average workplace death rate. Now, bear in mind that the government set what we know is a reasonably challenging goal of a 25% reduction of death and serious harm in New Zealand by 2020. And I'm pleased to report that we are well on the way to achieving that, where the death rate has now reduced by 25%. Now, it's a 3-year rolling average and one swallow doesn't make a summer, but I think that is a very good indication of both the importance that this government places on workplace health and safety and also the response, the very pleasing response from industry to that call. And I also note that the Forestry Industry Safety Council earlier or late last month mentioned their very good performance in halving the serious harm rate since 2013. And as we know, that was the annus horribilis for forestry deaths, with 10 that year. We had 1 in 2014 and 3 in 2015. Now, 1 is one too many. I certainly accept that. But I think the trajectory of improving workplace health and safety in this country is very much on track. And that's before the Health and Safety at Work Act has even been brought into effect on the 4th of April this year. The Prime Minister also mentioned employment standards. I think it's very important that we have a fair and flexible employment framework, and I know that the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee is working extremely hard under the astute chairmanship of Jonathan Young to bring that bill back before the House in the next couple of weeks. It will provide extra paid parental leave, including, thanks to David Seymour and the ACT Party, extra support for parents of severely premature babies on top of the generous increases that the government is putting in place. It will increase the sanctions on employers for poor record keeping and other failure to meet minimum employment standards, and importantly, it will address the issue of 0 hours. Now, I know the committee is working productively, but they don't agree on all aspects of that bill. I'll be looking forward to the debate in the future. But this is a very, very clear indication that the government, as the recovery continues to improve, wants to make sure that all workplaces are fair, flexible and safe. Now, I do just want to touch on revenue for a moment. This is one of the areas where, for a new minister, the work program is pretty much set in stone. There's not a lot of wiggle room for me to come up with too many pie-in-the-sky ideas, which I think the Inland Revenue Department will be mightily relieved about, with, of course, the Business Transformation Project taking a significant part of their change program over the next 5 years. The commitment by the government is about $900 million on top of the investment that IRD is already able to make into what will be about a $1.5 billion change project. And that, together with the tax simplification and tax administration changes that the government will be making, I think will leave us in a much better place to collect the revenue that we need to ensure that we have the health, education and social supports required. Now, I do want to touch on the TPPA, and actually, before I go into the substance of that, I want to acknowledge, as the previous Minister of Police, the very good work that New Zealand Police did, particularly in Auckland, last Thursday. I read a number of comments and anecdotes about the fact that police should have been harder on the protesters, that they shouldn't have allowed them to close motorways and intersections and so on. Well, I want to remind this House that there was another country, actually, that doesn't have probably the reputation for freedoms that this one does, and that is Hong Kong, that in September and October 2014 had a protest that shut down the main thoroughfares into Hong Kong for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And for New Zealand Police to deal with that protest in the way they did, calmly, fairly, and without a single arrest, I think speaks to the very, very important role of protest in our democracy. Yes, it's important to protest and to make the point, but actually it's also important that people go about their business freely. And I thought our New Zealand Police did an excellent job last Thursday in enabling that to occur. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, I am absolutely none the wiser with Mr. Little having said that he was going to unequivocally, today, for all time, clear up Labor's position on TPP. And I must say, I am absolutely none the wiser. This is very much a dollar each way response. In fact, I sit and watch the dollar each way. David's over there, David Cunliffe, David Clark, David Shearer, David Parker, all advocates of free trade. There's others, Clayton Cosgrove, Phil Goff. We know these MPs understand and support free trade. So my question is this: how on earth can a party support free trade in this country and the reducing of barriers to trade and not support the TPPA, the largest trade agreement ever negotiated in the world? And a lot has been said about dairy not being as good as it could. So let me get this straight. By anybody who opposes TPPA because dairy wasn't good enough is basically saying because the upside wasn't good enough, that's a downside. Well, I'm sorry, I'll take the bird in that hand any time. And particularly with respect to primary products, what's very good on the upside and the speed with which they dismissed $2.7 billion of net benefit. When we also know by comparison with the China FTA that the very, very conservative estimates of net benefit in that trade agreement, the single best thing the previous Labor government did for this country, were well understated, and the actual benefits are many, many times more than that. So let's take it at just $2.7 billion, and let's think about what that means if we don't go in. Because we know the upside is very strong, but the downside is very, very dangerous. And I think the Prime Minister mentioned this at Brighton a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't there, but I will paraphrase because I think the analogy is very important. If one is a freezing worker producing lamb for export into countries that presently have a 30 or 40% tariff put on it, and if our neighbours sign up to a free trade agreement that eliminates their 30 to 40% tariff, and you are the consumer in that receiving country seeing a New Zealand lamb and an Australian lamb, and your New Zealand lamb is 30 to 40% more expensive because of the tariff, which lamb are you going to buy? I think the question answers itself. And for all of those who oppose this agreement because of what it might do for Maori and the treaty, let's think about how many young Maori men and women work in those industries, those primary export-focused industries, whose jobs would be lost if Australia's lamb tariffs were reduced or eliminated and New Zealand's weren't. Because the upside is very good, but the downside is dramatically bad for this country. I don't think Labor, deep down, disagrees with that. But they are so deeply, deeply in debt to the people that put their leader into power, into the leader of the opposition's place, that they cannot publicly state their strong support for free trade. And I know that if in a very, very distant future they become a government, they would not touch this trade agreement. In fact, they would be singing a very different song. This is a very, very good agreement. I think we start this year with a very clear understanding about who supports New Zealanders.